Brilliant. So, yes, thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's really amazing to see so many people from all over the world. I'm going to talk about incineration, waste to energy incineration as a full solution to climate change. I've been working with Zero Waste Europe and Gaia for the last 10 years, campaigning on climate and zero waste incineration, supporting members from our network all over the world in fighting this technology. And so in the next 10 minutes, I'll keep it brief. So I've just gone to the really, to the essential arguments. Please send your questions if there's anything that I have missed or any other comments or questions that you may have. So just briefly to mention about Zero Waste Europe is a network of organizations, individuals, and experts in Europe, supporting local groups and communities in promoting zero waste strategies. We influence the European policies and also support a network of zero waste cities that are moving forward zero waste transition. We are the regional network of Gaia, that is the global network of grassroots groups and NGOs and individuals working for a just zero waste world, where burning and dumping of waste is avoided and replaced with zero waste solutions. So as I was saying, I started working with Gaia 10 years ago, precisely campaigning on climate policy. And so I'm going to give an overview of the situation. So when we look at the connection between waste and climate change, really waste is not the first thing that we think about when we think like what causes climate change. There's fossil fuels, there's transport, there's aviation, there's meat consumption. Obviously, there's all these very important contributions to climate change. And waste doesn't appear to be that big sector. Part of this is because if we look at the methodologies of how the emissions are counted in the IPCC, the International Panel for Climate Change report, we will see that indeed the contribution from the waste sector doesn't appear to be so big in comparison to other sectors. And this is because these methodologies are only looking at the disposal stage of waste, which definitely are very important sources of greenhouse gas emissions. So we have, in the first place, we have landfills. So landfills emit greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, because of all the organic waste that misplaced goes to landfills and rottens and creates these greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really important source. The other very important source are incinerators themselves. This is a picture of the incinerator in Paris. This is the action we did in the context of the COP15 in Paris in 2015. So you see here how in red is the contribution, supposed contribution, what's accounted for the waste sector. This is the greenhouse gas emissions that are accounted in the IPCC report. These emissions only take into account landfill and incinerators. As I was saying, here we have a landfill that emits methane because of the organic waste that is misplaced there. And here we have the incinerator, the one in Paris that I was mentioning. So obviously when the waste is burned, it creates CO2 equivalent and other toxic emissions. And these are the main two sources of greenhouse gas emissions that are taken into account. But then if we think of waste as containing products that have a whole life cycle, products that have been extracted, that have been processed, have been distributed, consumed, and disposed, obviously all these greenhouse gas emissions that are embedded in these products account for a much larger proportion of the anthropogenic emissions that we are giving to the atmosphere. And this report, to illustrate the proportion of that, was mentioning that it was in the US up to 42% of greenhouse gas emissions. So actually, when we think of waste and climate change, if we think of this much bigger picture, we see that we have a much bigger opportunity to reduce emissions in the field of waste than just looking at landfill and incineration. And this is precisely what we talk about in this report that we published in 2015 in the context of the Paris COP, that went a bit more in detail explaining how much of the waste prevention, reuse and recycling are really the options higher up in the waste hierarchy that provide the biggest gains in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions in comparison to landfill and incineration, which are actually options that are net contributors to our carbon budget. Yet, this is the introduction, yet what we see is that waste to energy incineration is definitely promoted as a climate solution, definitely still growing in the UK, very much so, and in many other places around the world. So UK WIN is the UK Without Incineration Network. This is the member of our network that is based here in the UK. And they maintain a map of incinerators in the UK, where you can see all the incinerators that are currently operating and the ones that are planned, the ones that are in the pipeline coming up, which at the moment is sort of up to 50. So there's also a really nice account of all the incinerators that have been prevented thanks to the action of the UK WIN network. So it's not only that these incinerators are very much in the pipeline in the UK, also in the global south, especially the northern European countries really are looking at the markets in the global south to push this technology, but also that we see that they come placed in a situation that clear environmental injustice. So Greenpeace published this report this summer where they expose how the UK incinerators are 3 times as likely to be in deprived areas, revealing how much of this planning system is inherently unjust, classist, and racist. This is not unique to the UK as well. A report from Gaia in the US also identified that the vast majority of the US incinerators are located in the country's most marginalized communities. And again, as I was saying before, if we look at the global south, this is again a similar situation. So you will see that incinerators are definitely impacting the most vulnerable communities that are already facing up to a lot of other challenges. So incineration still is promoted as a climate solution. And the main argument that the industry uses is that there is production of energy. So they say, well, we have this waste, we take energy out of it, so that's great. We have to ask really, what's the price of this energy? What's the cost of this energy? In terms of the climate, it cannot be considered that this is a low carbon technology. So the report from UK WIN that I have put here, the link, so I recommend the reading. It's really interesting, very well done report by UK WIN, accounted for that in 2017, the UK's incinerators released a combined total of nearly 11 million tons of CO2. So let's also bear in mind what is burned in the waste. A lot of it is the plastic. So the carbon intensity of the electricity that comes from incineration, because comes actually from fossil sources like plastic, it really is very intense. So if we actually compare it with fossil gas, it's a lot higher. If we compare it with the average carbon intensity of the European electricity grid, is actually a lot higher. So I have put some numbers here to give you like a bit of a bit more specific comparison. But essentially, this is a very carbon intensive source of electricity, very inefficient. And obviously, the key thing is that all these resources that are being burned, they are just disappearing and they're becoming ash and toxic emissions. So a bit more on that. definitely it is a really important source of air pollution. So the ash, the fumes that go out of the incinerator contain heavy metals, dioxins, particulates, and greenhouse gases. There is not enough monitoring, not enough enforcement, not enough transparency. There is also a point here, which is that there is the ash that goes and the toxic fumes that go in the air, but there is also the ashes that go from the bottom ash, that are the actual ash that results from the burning. That needs to be landfilled as well. So it does not really get away, it does not avoid the actual landfilling of something, which then becomes very toxic ash, creating the same environmental problems as any other landfilling, like contaminating of the soils, of the rivers, of the water, subterranean, etc. So especially now in the context of COVID, when we know that air pollution is becoming this driver for really worsened health of people, definitely, incinerators were never the solution, but now even less. So
1 minute warning, Marielle.
Thank you. Very quickly, there's also the systemic point of view. So basically what we see is that most of a massive proportion of what goes into an incinerator is recyclable material. And if we see all these councils in the UK are the ones that have great incinerator rates, they are the ones that have worse recycling rates. Why is that? There is a real trend, a real correlation between more incineration, less recycling. This is because actually the councils they are engaged, they are locked in contracts for a long time, 30 years or so. These contract mechanisms oblige the council to be feeding the incinerators, in the sense that it's impossible for the council to put this waste away and implement policies for waste prevention, reuse, and recycling. So this is really a lock-in situation that will be a mortgage for the community for the 30 years or so. So finally, just being very brief, incineration is a very carbon-intensive source of energy. It's a source of air pollution and harm. It creates lock-in situations for councils. It's a very expensive source of energy and actual cost of building and maintenance. It worsens completely the environmental injustices in the UK and all over the world. And at the end of the day, ultimately, it exacerbates a linear economy that hides waste. And waste is really the result of an unsustainable model of production and consumption that we actually need to see and face and avoid, not just burn and hide it while polluting everyone and all the planet. So I'll leave it there. Please send your questions and comments. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.